From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Aloha, everyone. My name is Betsy Peterson. I'm the director of the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress, and I want to welcome you to the latest presentation of the Benjamin A. Botkin Lecture Series. Now, the Botkin series allows the Folklife Center to accomplish many good works, and most importantly, I think it allows us to highlight and present the work of leading scholars in folklore, ethnomusicology, oral history, area studies, and cultural heritage, and to bring those individuals here to the library. It also allows the Folklife Center to increase and augment our collections because every lecture that is given as part of the series is videotaped and becomes a permanent part of our collection. It also is webcast on the libraries and on the American Folklife Center's website and becomes available to people all over the world. And so, in keeping with that, if you do have a phone on right now, I would suggest you turn it off so you do not become memorialized in our archive. Today, I have the honor of introducing the distinguished scholar, educator, activist, and colleague, Dr. Franklin Odo. Dr. Odo is a third-generation Hawaiian, and he came east a while ago to receive degrees in Princeton and Harvard before returning to the West Coast in the 1960s to teach at Occidental College, and where he played a very important role in establishing ethnic studies programs and in particular Asian American studies programs. Dr. Odo has had an eminent career as a professor and has taught at several universities, including UCLA, Cal State Long Beach, the University of Pennsylvania, Princeton, Hunter College, the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and I think most recently the University of Maryland. But he is equally celebrated for his work as the founding director of the Smithsonian's Asian Pacific America program. And as director of that program, Dr. Odo brought numerous exhibits to the Smithsonian highlighting the experiences of Chinese Americans, Native Hawaiians, Japanese Americans, Filipino Americans, Vietnamese Americans, Korean Americans, and Indian Americans. And I should add, after he retired from the Smithsonian, although it hardly seems to be a retirement, he came to the Library of Congress for a brief stay and served for a while as the acting head of the library's Asian division. He also, I believe, is spearheading a study for the National Park Service right now, which will inform their work with Asian Pacific Americans as they go forward with their planning. Among his many publications, Dr. Odo is well remembered as a co-editor of the seminal 1971 Asian American anthology Roots, an Asian American Reader, and also for his authorship of a pictorial history of the Japanese in Hawaii, 1885 to 1924, No Sword to Bury, and as the editor of the Columbia Documentary History of the Asian American Experience. That's a lot. But today we are delighted to have him talk about a book that he has just recently completed and which is out there, out in the lobby, and called Voices from the Canefields, Folksongs from Japanese Immigrant Workers in Hawaii. And it has just been published by Oxford University Press. So please, on your way out, if you have not purchased a copy, please feel free to do so. And I'm sure Dr. Odo will be happy to talk to you about it after his presentation here. This presentation, finally, we are also pleased to say that we are co-sponsoring it with the library's Asian division. And before I welcome, or not before I welcome, I am just going to welcome the head of the Asian division, Dr. Dongfang Shao, to come up and say a few words and introduce Dr. Odo. Dr. Shao.
Actually, I prepared introduction. It's very similar. That was, so I won't repeat. Yeah, very sorry. Yeah, actually, the everything is almost the same. Yeah, but I want to mention one thing. Yeah, the Dr. Odo was my predecessor. Yeah, for the Asian division, and he had been there for 13 months and did wonderful job. And currently, he still is the board member of French Society of Asian Division, yeah, and help us to do the fundraising, to conduct programs, yeah, and it's very important, yeah. And I hope next month we will have another French Society board meeting, and Dr. Odo will join us, yeah. And it's a very good turnout, yeah, for the noontime, and many people, especially for Friday noontime, yeah, in Nampen, yeah. So let me welcome Dr. Odo for his wonderful talk. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Shao, and thank all of you for joining us this Friday noon. I want to thank a couple of people. Todd, who helped me navigate the AFC in an earlier series, so that I would not seem too ignorant about ethnomusicology and folk life. When I started doing, I knew a lot about the Japanese American history and the folk and the folk songs, but needed to learn a little bit more about the field itself. So I'm grateful to Todd. Thanks, Betsy, and especially Nancy for having done so much work on this. And I want to also acknowledge Reme Grafalda for her work in the division, and my former colleagues there, Eiichi Ito, and I don't know if I've missed anyone else, but it was a good 13 months here, and it's always nice to come back and visit. This is I wanted to start with just a little word about sugar, because it gets a really bad rap among nutritionists these days as sort of empty calories with deleterious effects on our health. But you know, it's been a really, really important part of our culture and our experiences. Particularly, I always like to remind people that, for one thing, sugar was the only food commodity that was rationed during World War II. So it must have been considered very important. I guess GIs need candy or something like that. But it's also useful, I think, to remember that sugar, like cotton, rubber, coffee, tea, was part of the whole global enterprise of industrial agriculture that developed, and which required huge amounts of land, labor, capital, and which created a tremendous amount of disparity between owners and workers, including slaves, of course, or indentured servants, or contract workers in the case of Japanese immigrants in Hawaii. Now that work, the sugar in particular, was critical to Hawaii, and between the 1850s and the 1950s, for well over a century, sugar ruled Hawaii. The folks who controlled the sugar plantations controlled the society. And it turns out that I was born into that society and graduated from high school in 1957. So that period is one that I sort of experienced really well, although wasn't aware exactly how much control the sugar planters had. So this exercise was a really interesting one for me to undertake. The jobs on the plantations were onerous. They were burdensome. Towards the end of that period, the International Longshoremen's and Warehousemen's Union transformed that experience, turning the sugar planters and the pineapple workers into the highest paid agricultural workers in the world. So one of the things you'll hear in this afternoon's presentation is something about how these folks who worked on the plantations actually retired fairly well, and how they look back on their experiences. So now, if you have the flyer with the essay on the back, I'm not going to repeat that. You can take that home as homework, and there'll be a quiz at the next Botkin lecture. So I expect you to study the essay seriously. Anyway, let me show you, and I promise not to sing. So, but I do want you to get a sense of what the songs sound like. They're short, and like poetry in the Japanese tradition, they are in lines of 7 or 5 syllables. A tradition which goes back, I'm told, to the Heian period, about 1000 A.D. Anyhow, let me do this first. This is a sampler from a PBS documentary which is in production at this point. So they're in post-production. They need a few $1,000s. So if you happen to have a checkbook handy, you can. Just kidding. Anyhow. The University of Hawaii West Oahu Center for Labor Education and Research is producing the documentary, and a website that is very extensive as well. So you can look forward to a lot of people singing these songs and who have sung these songs. And I'll talk a little bit about how the preservation process took place for them. Anyhow, here we go.
Hawaii, Hawaii to yo, yonge te kita ga, nagasu namida mo kiri no naka. Yukoka American Kaero ka Nihon Koko ga Xi'an no Hawaii koku.
First of all, it's emotionally beautiful. I mean, regardless of what you might think in terms of legacy, in terms of remembrance, in terms of history, the songs themselves have a character and tone all their own, unforgettable. It's basically like Buddha Head blues, you know what I mean? It's like listening to Muddy Waters if you're from Mississippi. It's the same thing. I don't care if you don't like the blues, there's a voice there that you can't ignore. It grips you. It's gripping culture.
I worked from 6 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That's the way it was. We were given an hour for meals. In between, they'd give us a little bit of time to smoke. In Japan, I wasn't used to doing this kind of extremely difficult work, and it was hard to bear until I got used to it.
昔、今はトロンコなんかでも柳ごろわかるでしょ？はい。あれを掲げて来られる自分に。
Our trunks. You know what yanagigori is, right? We came with our wicker suitcases. The women would go into the fields where the cane was planted and go along the lines. As people did the holehole work, we sang the songs.
芝居でこれはね。それでその時私がこっちでホレホレ節をやったんよ。ハワイハワイ島よ夢見てきたが流す涙も霧の中ついてこいついてこいって
雨は降り出すよ洗濯物は濡れる背中の子は泣くまんま焦げる which is I think those few lines just kind of explain so much in so little. You know, it's raining, the clothes are getting wet, child is crying on his mother back, the rice is getting burnt. I mean, it's just, it tells a story in just 4 lines, you know, and it's like that was life.
Well, I think Hore Hore Bushi and the reason why it's become such a touchstone for our knowledge of plantation experience is because these are songs that seem to come from the people. In other words, the melody may have been set, but people were willing to throw in their own lives and their own sentiments into the song, and that makes them so valuable. If we want to know something of what some of these women's lives were like, not everybody's, but some of these women's lives, what they were like, then in some ways we could do no better than to listen to their own words as expressed through song.
Okay, so I'm not going to take a lot of time with this PowerPoint, but I wanted to show you some images of some of the kinds of work that went on in the plantations, and then some of the individuals that come up in the presentation. So this is a photo. I told you the plantations. Sugar plantations begin in the 1840s, but they really flourish during the Civil War here in the United States because Southern sugar was cut off as a source to the industrial North. So the plantations eventually number close to 70, I think, in Hawaii, and production zooms during and after the Civil War. The original laborers were drafted, conscripted from the Native Hawaiian population, but that population was problematic for the sugar planters. Number one, because the total population was crashing. We think there were over 400,000 Native Hawaiians when Captain Cook, quote unquote, discovered the islands in the 1770s. By the 1890s, that population had decreased to 1/10 of its former size, down to 30-something thousand people. So, of course, labor had to be found elsewhere. There were originally Chinese who were brought in from the United States continent, the mainland, and when the Chinese Exclusion Act was imposed in 1882, planters looked to Japan for a source of labor. In 1885, large groups of contract laborers began arriving in Hawaii. And this is a photograph from 1893, which also happens to be the year my father's dad went to Kauai as an immigrant. So this is what they look like. Wanted to show you this. Mr. Urata, the man who sang the song at the beginning, is the person who is singularly responsible for recuperating these songs from oblivion. And that's Mrs. Asakura, who also was in the video next to him, and her then husband is next to her. So all three of them are now deceased. That really good-looking fellow, I thought you'd enjoy seeing that photograph. That's has grown up to be not quite so distinguished looking in his later years. Anyway, so here's the cutting of sugarcane, kachikane, flumes carrying the cane. Sugarcane evidently has this quality which requires cut cane to be taken to the mill for crushing very quickly, because it soon begins to lose its sugar content after being cut. The songs are often, these songs, the holehole bushi, are often considered women's songs, although men created, composed, and sang them as much as the women did. But they're sort of known that way because they are associated with the work, the holehole work that you've seen described. But the converse is not true, that only men did what was called the heavy, I guess what you call heavy lifting. These bundles of cane were often 70 to 100 pounds. And women, as you can see here, did the work as well. So I mean, it's a little bit more sexy to think about how the women worked. So that's one of the reasons I think it's considered women's songs. But this particular image is of a woman with a hoe, and chopping weeds or cutting weeds was one of the jobs that was considered women's work. And the outfit that you saw Alison Arakawa wear gave you a sense of just how tightly clothed they were. In the hot sun, this was not very comfortable, but that little critter on the left, the centipede, was accompanied by other insects like scorpions, bees, wasps, and so on, along with really sharp and hairy needle-like appendages on the sugarcane leaves against which they had to be protected. So when the workers went out in teams, they were usually overseen by folks called luna in Native Hawaiian, the field overseers. And so the whip is shown here because they carried them as a sign of authority, but occasionally used them as well. So there's a huge legacy of resentment against people who were the overseers. The Japanese government knew that the Chinese workers on the West Coast in particular were subject to a great deal of social dysfunction because there was an enormous imbalance in the gender ratio. At best 18 or 20 to 1, sometimes approaching 50 or 100 to 1 in different locales. So that imbalance led to opium use, loneliness, prostitution, all kinds of social disorganization. So the Japanese government, hoping to avoid those excesses, mandated, negotiated with the Native Hawaiian government that at least 1 in 5 workers from Japan be women. But if you think about it, this is a cohort of folks in their late teens into their 30s and early 40s. So having one married couple and 3 bachelors made for some really interesting dysfunctional situations as well. So so there were weddings and there were geisha, but there were also prostitutes, and some women came as prostitutes. Others were kidnapped, hijacked into prostitution. Others voluntarily, quote unquote, left their work to become prostitutes. And I'll show you some lyrics then explaining why. And so there's a lot of Nisei children, the children of the immigrants who were born. I'll talk about some chores that they had. And here's Mr. Urata again, and Allison. Mr. Urata was born in 1917. At the age of 2, was sent by his, or 6 maybe, was sent by his mom to Kumamoto, I think, to be reared by his relatives because his father had died when he was 2, and so she needed some help in rearing their kids. So he grew up in Japan and was sent to Seoul, Korea for his high school years. He returned to Honolulu in 1937 and wanted to go back. He had been admitted to Waseda University, an elite private university in Japan. But his mom cried and insisted that he stay home because she knew that the Japanese were beginning to create a military empire, and of course they were already in China in North China at the time, and she knew that the government would be looking to conscript more and more young men, and didn't want her son to be put in that situation. So he eventually enrolled in Mid-Pacific Institute. So that's his photo at the lower left, as a 20-year-old. And he tells the story of being in his social studies class, and they were discussing American democracy when the principal came, pulled him out of class, took him to the office where 2 FBI agents arrested him on no charges, no trial, no conviction, but he was interned in Honolulu in 1943-44 when 120,000 Japanese Americans were interned during World War II in a number of different camps scattered throughout the United States. So one of the things he did after leaving the Honolulu camp was to create a musical career, and so people like Allison Allison herself, I think, was a student for about 19 years, studying with Mr. Urata, and he, in 1999, I think, NHK, the giant television production, government production unit in Japan, which ran, and I think still does run, the Nodo Jiman throat pride singing contest in Japan. They held that contest in 1999 in Honolulu. And Mr. Urata basically badgered Allison into donning a costume and entering that contest. And she really resisted that because she knew that all of the other contestants would be wearing elegant kimono and singing wonderful ballads. And here she had peasant costume and peasant songs to sing and was really embarrassed. Well, it turns out she won the grand prize, and to everybody's surprise. And so a couple years later, NHK commissioned their morning series called Sakura to feature a Japanese American woman like Allison. So now this is a statue of plantation workers on the island of Maui. And one of the things I said was that Mr. Urata had passed away he gave me his materials in the 1980s and asked me to do a book. And I deeply regret that he never saw the book, and he died in 2009. But one of the things that he cherished was that I had arranged for the Folklife Center at the Smithsonian to accept his materials, so at least they'll be protected. So that's so I don't want to go on too long. I want to make sure we leave some time for some comments or questions. So if you want to, the book is divided into chapters that deal with work, and there are a lot of. I'll tell you about one particular set of songs, though. Some of you are old enough to remember the days when factory workers had to use speed up to try to extract the utmost labor from their workers without paying them more. So the plantations, of course, did exactly that. And I want to read you some lines. So they had these guys that were called hippari men, English. Hipparu is in Japanese to pull along or to drag along with you. So these were basically speed up folks, younger, stronger folks who were paid a little bit extra in order to set a fast pace for others to try to keep up with while they're doing their work. And usually in holehole work, they start at a particular line, and so people are working one line, and so you can see very quickly who's going faster and who's going slower. So if you put the hippari men folks in the center, and they can be clearly seen by all the other workers, that creates a tension and a factor that creates more labor. So here's a song coming from the hippari man, the person who's setting the pace. Keep up with me and stop complaining. You can't do holehole work with your mouth. So then the people behind, who sometimes used to throw stones at these guys when they could get away with it, in order, number one, punish them, and number two, slow them down. So they said, so someone in the back would sing, "Why should I work so fast and follow your lead? You get the extra cash, not me." And then a third person might sing, "They get 10 cents more each day to set an ungodly pace. Feed them to the dogs and let them die." So there are a lot of songs about work, and a lot of them are talk about the difficulties and the oppression of work, including the fearful Luna, who are the overseers. But we mentioned the fact that there are women who are there. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the women. One of the songs, some of the songs are clearly from the perspectives of women, and that is really interesting. One goes, tomorrow, one very famous one, and these are sung by men as well as women, so it's really interesting. Tomorrow is Sunday. Come visit me. My husband will be out watering the cane. I'll be home alone. Or another, if I fight with my husband, I can be with you. So let's start this brawl. The sooner the better. Or, I told you a little bit about prostitution. So in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the base pay for women was about 35 cents a day for 6.5 days, 5.5 days a week. The Sunday was off, but they worked until noon on Saturdays. So the term, even today, for people of Chinese descent in Hawaii is sometimes pake. And many people in Hawaii don't consider this a derogatory term. I happen to think it at least smacks of that. So I translate pake as a Chinaman. So one song goes, "Why settle for 35 cents a day doing holehole work when I can sleep with a Chinaman and make a buck?" And of course, there are some of the men whose women now, as I say, if they find their husbands with whom they're matched unattractive or abusive or uncaring, they have at least 3 other guys anxious to make her change her mind. And so some of the songs are like, "Hey, let's quit doing this holehole work. Come with me and I'll take you to Honolulu, to the big city, you know." And of course, then there are men who are being cuckolded or being jilted. So they sing, "I watch her passion shrivel." I'm sorry. I started. "Night after night, I watch her passion shrivel. Which bastard is slipping it through her now?" That's a relatively clean one, so I can tell you about that one. If you want the other ones that are more earthy, you have to buy the book. So let me end. If you're interested, I can tell you about some of the songs that were done in retrospect. In 1960, for example, one of the Japanese dailies called the Hawaii Times circulated a contest soliciting holehole bushi in 1960, when most of the Issei, the immigrant generation, had retired. And so they expected a few people to enter this contest. And several hundred entries were submitted. Out of that, about 100 were selected and published in the paper. And so that was a very interesting collection of holehole bushi that I saw. But I wanted to go back just briefly to the song that Allison introduced to you about the woman and the baby on her back and all. This is, I think, let me remind you, "A sudden downpour drenches the laundry, the baby on my back sobs, and the rice just burned." So I want to read to you. The book is almost entirely factual, based on interviews or newspaper accounts or memoirs or the songs. But in one instance, with this song, I couldn't resist sort of trying to create a narrative. But what was happening to this woman? Why, how could this happen, and why should we care? And so this is what I wrote. In narrative form, this might be the story of a young Japanese woman framed in a sepia-toned photograph, looking older than her years. It could be June 1903, and she might be on the island of Maui in the territory of Hawaii. She stands just outside her plantation shack under a roof made of discarded sugar stalks. One hand is at her brow, the other is frantically trying to calm a distressed infant on her back. A little girl, about 2 years old, clings to her faded and drab kimono. Her older brother, about 4, stands to one side, looking bored. It's the middle of a hot afternoon, and the woman is perspiring. She had arisen at 4 a.m. to feed a gang of workers, including her husband, before the start of their jobs in the sugarcane fields. After cleaning the breakfast dishes, feeding her 2 toddlers, and nursing her baby, she builds a fire of wood gathered from the forest and boils a tub of water for scrubbing seemingly endless diapers and clothes for her infant and 2 small children. Then she boils more water for filthy work clothes from single laborers for a bit of extra cash. The clothing would be needed soon, and the men would be impatient. She hangs the clothes to dry by early afternoon and looks forward to taking them down to fold. In the meantime, she places several large rice pots on wood fires to feed the group of workers for dinner, and rushes to pick up her hungry infant. After feeding the children, changing a diaper, nursing her infant, and changing yet another diaper, she fastens her baby on her back in the traditional Japanese ombu fashion. This allows her to continue using both hands to keep working. Soon, however, she finds that the infant is still hungry and dirty and wailing into her ear. To her dismay, there's a clap of thunder and, all too typical for Hawaii, a sudden tropical downpour. The laundry, drying on long bamboo poles, is suddenly and thoroughly drenched. Distracted and exhausted from bringing in the wet laundry and preparing the rest of the evening meal, she turns belatedly to the cooking fires and discovers that all of the rice has burned. She thinks of the day and night ahead of her, cleaning the pots, washing yet another batch of rice, restoking the fire, preparing the rest of the meal, and cleaning up the dinner before retiring, perhaps about midnight. It would be difficult to imagine a more dispiriting image than this, an all too frequent experience of plantation wives. So that was my foray into creative writing in the book. Let me stop there and invite questions or comments. Yes?
Franklin, do you know if any of the bosses or Luna tried to censor some of the singing of the song?
No, they didn't understand because it was all done in Japanese. And Theo, you would know in Hawaii, the Portuguese have a particular setting in the unequal kind of racial hierarchy because they're not considered white, and they were often placed in the Luna category, and so we're roundly number one, hated by the workers for making them work so hard. That was their job, and despised by the haules, the other Caucasians in Hawaii, for being in that position as well. So they had a difficult position, which carries over. I don't know, does that still exist in Hawaii?
Well, especially in the humor.
Yeah. In ethnic humor, Portuguese are often disparaged. So, yeah.
Are there any children's songs in this collection?
No. They're all adults. They're songs about children, but no children's songs. Yeah.
Have these been written down in sheet music with the lyrics for the Hawaii
Yes.
Archives?
Yes, actually, the Library of Congress has a copy. But if you sort of think back to Mrs. Asakura singing, someone who actually sang the songs in the field, Mr. Urata captured about 30 of these, and they sound all very different in the way that John Lomax might have captured songs from the Appalachians. But Mr. Urata prettified the melody in the same way that Joan Baez and Harry Belafonte and others in the 50s and 60s did for American folk music in order to make them marketable and pleasant to the ear. So he did that along with another composer, and copyrighted that, the score. So we have that in the library here in the manuscript division. So what Allison sings and what people generally sing today is a homogenized, more melodious version of what was sung in the fields. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Nancy.
Oh, okay, sorry. Are these based on an older Japanese tradition of work songs?
Yeah, they are. In fact, Mr. Urata and a number of other people tried to trace the base song from which they emanated, and he thinks that it's likely to be something that comes from the Momizuri Uta, or song of threshing rice, that the Hiroshima people sang traditionally. Other folks disagree, but generally they think that it comes from songs that were sung in southwestern Japan, Yamaguchi Prefecture, Hiroshima Prefecture, and that's probably true because that's where a lot of the immigrants came from. And the
Why did they go in fishing if you get paid 35 cents a day? Why did they go fishing?
Well, because there was so much fish at that time. You know, you couldn't make. Actually, there were Japanese who did commercial fishing. In fact, they started the tuna fishing industry in Japan. But for the most part, they couldn't earn a living doing that, unless they were part of the commercial fleet. And so the point of coming to Hawaii and working on the plantations was to earn some money. And the pay was very low, but it was a great deal more than they could have earned in Japan. So they were able to, for most of them, they were able to live very badly, but they could send some money home. And in the 1880s period, Japan was undergoing a terrible depression. And so going abroad to try to earn some money and sending some money back was something that made sense at the time. When they went on strike, which happened periodically, there was no unemployment insurance, there was no compensation, so the community divided up tasks. Somebody would go fishing, somebody would go hunting, somebody would provide lodging, and they withstood months sometimes of strikes in that fashion. Yes.
So a lot of your photos and examples are from like the end of the 19th century. When was it over, this practice, this kind of field work?
The field work? Yeah. Well, you know, one of the geniuses of the Hawaii sugar planter tradition was to be really on top of research. They had one of the best sugarcane research institutes in the world. So, for example, bringing the different kinds of tools or machines was something they did constantly. So the field work continued. Cutting. Maybe somebody here knows. I don't remember when machinery for cutting cane. I think that was more like post World War II became really common. Yeah.
There's also the point that in the 1900s, when the Americans took over the Philippines, the sugar industry started growing.
Right.
And then after the war, sugar was being imported from the Philippines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hawaii or to California? Yeah, to the U.S. To the U.S.
Yeah. Now, one of the I mentioned there are a number of preconditions for making sugar plantation work profitable. Accessibility to land. So in 1848, for example, American and European businessmen basically forced the Hawaiian monarchy to change its land tenure system to allow for purchasing land in fee, so that they could be sure that they controlled the land. And indeed, a lot of that Americanization of Hawaii, because people often don't recall that Hawaii was a separate kingdom, a separate monarchy that was recognized internationally. And in 1893, a cohort of American businessmen deposed the queen, Liliuokalani, and create a separate republic, because at the time the United States government did not want to annex Hawaii, partly because it was comprised primarily of people of color, and it was afraid, the government was afraid that if the Constitution followed the flag, that if we annexed the place, that the folks there would enjoy all the benefits of the Constitution. And in fact, that became an issue when Hawaii was eventually annexed in 1898, And then again in 1959, when Hawaii became a state, that there was some resistance among American political leaders to having Hawaii enjoy that equality. So it was an uphill battle. There's still people in Hawaii, by the way, who would like to exercise independent autonomy and control, going as far as actual independence from the United States. But of course, Texas does that too. So, yeah.
You mentioned the Portuguese being Luna.
Yeah.
Do you know if there are any Japanese workers who became Luna?
Who became? Yes, there were. Not too many, but I think some of that changed over time, so that the plantations loosened that hierarchy. Yeah.
I have one more question. That is, wasn't there competition from the Caribbean? Because the sugar trade to England and Europe was vast at that time.
Well, the United States had a tariff on, so the Philippines basically was a colony of the United States. So we admitted sugar from the Philippines. But Hawaii, one of the main motivating factors for the American businessmen who controlled sugar in Hawaii was to be able to enter the market tariff-free. And so that was what constituted the major motivating force for the American businessmen who overthrew Liliuokalani, the last queen, who, by the way, came to Washington to try to plead the case for restoring sovereignty to Hawaii. And of course, she failed.
Thanks.
Yes.
I have two questions. My first one is, did you encounter difficulties in translating the songs? And then my second one is, after that translation, do you have a favorite, or is there one that speaks to you?
Well, and so, I like that, the one I created the narrative for, the woman. I mean, I think but there are any number of them that are really extraordinary, I think. Some of them have to do with, that were created later, like in 1952. It's only in 1952, after the U.S.-Japan treaty is signed in San Francisco, basically ending World War II. That's the first time since the early 1900s that immigrants are allowed to become naturalized citizens. That's one of the things that, we, as a country, had decreed that since 1882 that the Chinese, number one, couldn't come into the country, number two, couldn't become naturalized, and so that defined out of our national polity people from Asia and the Pacific, beginning systematically in 1917 and codified in the 1924 National Origins Act. So it's not 1943, because the United States was an ally, or China was an ally of the United States in the war against Japan. We changed that so that Chinese immigrants could become naturalized. And we imposed a quota of 105 individuals who could enter the United States if they were of Chinese origin. But that quota, as opposed to, say, a quota imposed on Italy or Poland or Venezuela or any place else, that quota was set against any Chinese, any person of Chinese descent who came from anywhere in the world, not just from China. So if you're Chinese coming from France or the Caribbean, you were set against that quota. I think that's probably my favorite. But again, the Hipparimen one is I think a really fun set of holehole bushi to illuminate working conditions and imperative, which is not so unfamiliar to us today, of imposing conditions that maximize labor, extracting labor at the least possible expense for You know, the whole Walmart controversy in D.C., for example. So yeah, so whose side do you take? You want jobs even though they're very badly paying, or do you want a living wage? It's very difficult.
We'll sing Holly Holly.
Go sing Holly Holly.
One more question?
Sure. One more?
Actually, well,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Actually, two, but I'll.
No, go ahead.
In talking about the working conditions, were any of the Holy Holy Bushi songs union songs? I mean, you talked about the sugarcane workers being unionized.
Yeah, no, I haven't found any that are union, but they certainly are resistance things. Some of them, including individuals who practice passive resistance, like drinking soy sauce, shoyu, in order to raise your blood pressure and induce a fever. During the war in Southeast Asia, I had friends who, trying to avoid conscription, would drink shoyu before they went to the medical, hoping that they would flunk the medical. And so there were workers who would say that they were ill and drink. So there's one in particular says something like, you know, I drank shoyu, went to the doctor, but too much time had passed. Dang, or something like that, you know. So his fever had subsided, so he had to go to work. But there's stories of people who were so despondent about having to do this 10 hours of work a day that they deliberately exposed their faces to bees' nests so that they would get stung and be excused for the day. It was pretty horrible. There was another you had.
Was about the composition of the songs. Are they improvised, or does I mean an individual compose a song?
We don't know.
Okay.
Because they're anonymous. But my guess is that there were lots and lots of improvised lyrics to them. The ones the 200 that survive today are probably by some Darwinian process, the ones that were picked up and sung over and over again. But there probably were hundreds or thousands of others that were improvised on the spot that people didn't, you know, maybe they were very good, but nobody picked up on them. So that's what happened.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Odo will be outside if anyone wants to buy a copy of the book and get it autographed. I think we can arrange that. And if you have additional questions, please go outside and Dr. Odo will be glad to answer them.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thanks.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.